The hearing's now resumed.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. Philip Eidsvik for the Area E and BC Fisheries Coalition. Good morning, panel members. Mr. Rosenberger, how long have we known about the stock problems in Early Springs and Early Stewarts?
There's stocks are reviewed annually, so the information on the trends are something that's discussed on an annual basis and have been for all the years that we're doing management.
Yeah, I mean, when has the trend been in a place where none of us are very happy?
I would suggest that there's a few people rather happy last year with the trend.
On Early Stewarts and Early Springs?
The Early Stewart return last year is the second largest escapement on its cycle that we have records for the 50-some years. We did not monitor one of the key streams. That wouldn't have made it the largest escapement, but it's a significant escapement, and the total return was relatively large.
Yeah. And what about the 3 previous cycles?
The returns on a number of those cycles are relatively lower in some of the years, but some of the years they're not dissimilar. We've been experiencing fairly significant en route mortalities in a number of those populations, so the total return is down, but the more significant issue is the en route mortality at this stage.
If I remember correctly, even in, I think it was 2000, we were down to 10,000 spawners or something. No, it's
not
okay,
to my record. The
yeah.
20 to 30,000 is the normal range of spawners for 3 of the 4 cycle years.
Oh, okay. And then what's our spawner goal for that overall?
We don't have a specific goal by each of the systems. That's part of the work that we're undertaking right now with the wild salmon policy, establishing lower reference points and upper reference points.
And what's the upper reference point on the good year?
We don't have those established at this point.
What were they previous, say, during the 1990s? Would 200,000 be off by far?
As a
spawning escapement goal for Early Stewarts?
Well, I don't have all the specific information on the goals on each of the years.
Maybe you can help me on this point. Is any public commercial fishing happened on Early Stewarts in the last 20 years?
Yes.
Can you tell me what year?
1993 and 1994.
Anybody fished Early Stewarts since 1993, 1994?
Has anybody fished since then?
Yes. Yeah, has there been any fishery on Early Stewart sockeye since 1993, 94?
Yes.
And who was those fisheries?
Primarily, they're harvested in the First Nations food social ceremonial fishery.
Okay. What about Early Springs? When was the last time the public commercial fleet? And I know there used to be a early spring fishery in Area E in the Lower River by the Gillnet fleet. Can you tell us the last time there was a targeted fishery on Early Springs by the public commercial fleet?
In the in-river Gillnet fishery closed in 79 or 80. The Chinook as a whole are managed as an aggregate. We primarily tried to define areas where we find weaker stocks, which the earliest timed Chinook populations in the Fraser are, and try to minimize the impact, but we don't set directed harvests in the mixed stock fisheries by an individual single stock.
But generally the early springs, April, May, part of June?
Their migration timing is significantly longer than that.
Yeah, about from when, can you tell me?
The first fish start entering the Fraser usually sometime in late February and March, and they'll continue to enter the Fraser into August.
Has there been a FSC fishery on Early Springs for the last 10, 15 years?
Yes, there has.
I want to talk just a bit about management issues, and this is an easy question. I'm not suggesting a number, but if the FSC allocation for Fraser River sockeye was 200,000 pieces, for example, it'd be a pretty easy fishery to manage and deliver 200,000 every single year. Is that correct?
The relative value or numerical value doesn't necessarily change the ability to define what's easy or hard in returning. It's making sure that you have clear numbers and a process that you're taking into account in the management.
Easier to deliver 200,000 than a million plus?
Well, that would depend on the volume of fish coming back in total and where they were migrating to in the Fraser.
In the last 10 years, would it have been easier to deliver 200,000 sockeye into the river than 1 million sockeye in the river for food purposes?
I think your concept that a smaller number is easier than a larger number is the key point there, so I would agree with that.
Mr. Cray, maybe you can help me on this. Can you tell me what year the Stolo didn't finish Fishery Stewart sockeye? You're pretty good at this. I know you got it in your head.
Mr. Commissioner, I take all compliments, but I think your confidence may be misplaced. I can't recall the last year that there was a directed Stalo fishery on early Stewart sockeye. I don't have my notes with me.
Mr. Cray, while you're on it, with respect to sharing the space on the river, you were part of a group that sought an injunction unsuccessfully to get the sports fishermen off the river during certain fisheries, certain Stolo fisheries. Is that correct?
Mr. Commissioner, that's incorrect. It was my community, my band, the chief and council, that sought an injunction, and they weren't successful. They were successful in getting an interim injunction over a weekend, but a different decision was made the following week, and that was at the Supreme Court in Victoria.
Yes, and you were at court that day.
Yes, I was observing on behalf of the Stalo Tribal Council.
And it was a permanent injunction that you sought, that particular group sought.
Once again, Mr. Commissioner, I wasn't in the court to seek a permanent injunction. It was the band, the Chiam First Nation, and I was an observer in the courtroom.
With respect to litigation versus non-litigation, the Stolo litigated the question of commercial sale to the Supreme Court of Canada in Vanderpeet, did they not?
Yes, they did.
And the court found no sale and no trade and barter, correct?
I'm not sure that we need an interpretation of what the Supreme Court of Canada has said.
Maybe perhaps I can ask it a different way. Are you aware that there's no commercial right to sell for the Stolo?
Again, I'm not sure that this witness needs to give a legal opinion on the state of affairs in the law.
Could you bring me tab number 95, please, Mr. Lund? Yes. And Mr. Cray, has the legal and illegal sale of Stolo fish had an impact on the ability of elders to get food fish?
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I object to this article being placed into evidence. Back in the enforcement hearings, we had a discussion. I objected to Mr. Eidsvik attempted admission of a transcript, and you ruled that it ought not to be admitted. And this article, as I understand, has a reference to that transcript. Most of it is about it, I believe. I think there were 2 articles. I believe this is the one. And so I object on that basis. It's a sort of, it would be allowing through the back door what wasn't allowed through the front.
I don't believe the articles do deal with it in detail. What it deals with is the availability of food fish. Certainly the second one, and the first one is related. And you spoke in the article, I believe. And I think, Mr. Commissioner, when you did reject it, it was because one of the reasons was because Commission Council objected because it was old. The transcript was 1989, and at that time we all thought 1989 was sort of irrelevant to the Commission. Since then we had the Harris paper that dealt with the period, I think, prior to contact up to 1980, so clearly age isn't an issue. And I think the question of the impact on of legal and illegal sales is important to the Commission on the food fishing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dixon. The objection of Commission Council was based on several grounds. One was the age of the paper. One was the possible source of the paper. It appeared to have been disclosure from a criminal case, and concerns arise about whether it was provided in breach of an implied undertaking. The third ground is perhaps related to the direction in your terms of reference not to seek to find fault. And this transcript seemed to be directed at unearthing potential criminal activity of a specific individual. And it was on those bases that I objected at the time and maintained the objection. With respect to this article, if what Mr. Eidsvik wants to do is put a statement of Mr. Cray to him and ask him about it, that may well be appropriate. If he wants to put a proposition to him with or without the article and ask whether he adopts it, that might be appropriate. But I wonder if we should hear the question and then have a chance for council to consider it before the question is answered.
I was just going to say I had lost the train of thought and had forgotten the question, Mr. Eisvik, given council's objection, so perhaps you could just...
I don't think I got to the question, Mr. Commissioner.
Perhaps you could put your question to the witness.
Yes, I shall. In Mark Hume's article, he quotes Gail Sparrow, who talks about the impact, the very negative impacts of legal and illegal sale of food fish on the ability of elders to get food fish. Do you hear these types of complaints in your community as well?
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I don't object to that question, but I would ask that the article be taken off the screen if we could. Thank you, Mr. Lund.
Mr. Kay, did you get my question? Has the legal...
I'm not sure now.
Well, we'll go over it one more time. Has the legal and illegal sale of food fish in your area affected the ability of elders to get their food fish?
Not to my knowledge.
About last year, I think it was a Stolo grandmother took out an ad in the Farmers News offering to buy sports fish. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was aware.
And
of this.
why did she offer to buy the sports fish?
I don't know. I don't know the lady in question, and I don't know why she followed that path.
You didn't inquire?
I didn't know who to inquire of. It was an anonymous letter.
No, it was an ad in the newspaper. You didn't see the ad?
Yeah, I saw it, but there was no name attached. I didn't know. I didn't know the source of the complainant or who the person was.
Okay. The second article in that tab refers to the issue of cold storage, which I think is useful to undertake. And perhaps, did you read Mark Hume's article where he quoted you on the cold storage?
Yes, I did, Mr.
Did he quote
Commissioner.
you accurately? Did he quote you accurately?
I don't have the benefit of the article in front of me, but...
Perhaps well, you do now. It's page 2 on the tab, Mr. Lund.
Apparently I don't, so...
Yeah, I will. And he says you say about 1/3 of our fish were in cold storage. And you yourself said that, I'm just trying to find the quote, that salmon is served at almost every ceremony, so it wouldn't be unexpected. Did you yourself store fish in cold storage?
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I don't believe this is the article in question that's on my screen. I think this is a
If
story
you go to
that-
page 2 of
Oh,
that,
sorry.
Mr. Lund, sorry. You can see it, the last couple of lines there. Is there only 2 pages in that tab, Mr. Lund?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, there's been an error here, I'm not sure. We'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Craig. But maybe you can answer the question for me anyway. Did you store fish in cold storage?
Personally, no, I didn't.
Do you know any idea how much it costs to store fish in cold storage?
Since I don't know how much it costs, I can't answer your question.
Okay, thank you. To what extent does illegal sale take place in your area? Illegal sale of food fish?
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner. Respectfully, I think that question is going a little bit outside of your terms of reference and your explanation that this is not directed at finger pointing. We've had the enforcement hearings as well, and to explore that issue. And I think during those hearings, there was some care taken not to turn this inquiry into a finger-pointing exercise. And my concern is that line of questioning that I hear my friend begin is going outside of that scope.
I'm not asking the Commissioner to make blame, but I think the level of sale and illegal sale and the impact it has on fisheries management and the disappearance of Fraser River sockeye is one of the critical issues before the Commission. Not asking the Commissioner to make any finding. What I'm trying to do is get a sense of how widespread it is in the community and whether it's a big factor or not. And we haven't heard the evidence of Mr. Cray, and I think it would be useful.
I think that it might be helpful, Mr. Eisvik. I'm not going to tell you how to pose your questions. That's up to you. But it might be helpful and more respectful, perhaps, just to couch it in terms of what his understanding is of the issues you've just raised. In other words, I think the question is put to him as if...
Mr. Commissioner, I
we
can
do that. But I think if you ask him for whether he has any understanding around those issues and how it relates to fisheries management, that might be helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Cray, perhaps you can help me on this one now. In the management of the Fraser River sockeye, in the lower Fraser River, is illegal sale and illegal fishing an issue?
Mr. Commissioner, I'm wondering if I could understand what Mr. Isaac means by illegal sale and illegal fishing. That's a conclusion of law left for judges and not for anybody else. And so if he wants to frame a question, I think he needs to tell us what he means by that.
Fishing during a closed time, fish caught under a license that does not authorize sale. How big an issue are those issues? Fishing during a time when DFO is not open to fishery, and I'm talking the lower Fraser Aboriginal fishery, and fishing and sales of fish when sale is not authorized. Are those issues of concern in the lower Fraser?
Well, they appear to be issue of concern to some folks, but I don't think those folks are in our community. They appear to be outside the community.
So if there is illegal sale of fish caught not under a commercial license, and fishing during a closed period, that's not a concern to your community?
Currently, Mr. Commissioner, when we do sell fish that we catch, we do so under agreements with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. We also have what are called food social ceremonial fisheries. Those fish are intended for just what it's described as a fishery for food, social needs in the community, and ceremonial purposes. So we do get opportunities to catch and sell fish, but it's done under agreements with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and it's closely regulated.
So a person sitting outside looking into the fishery in the lower Fraser, the Aboriginal fishery, doesn't have to be concerned about illegal sale or illegal fishing? Is that what you're saying? I'm trying to get that. I understand that there's some fisheries are legal where sale's allowed. Some fisheries are just food. You don't, what I'm trying to find out is this an issue that fishery managers should be concerned about?
Well, you'd have to ask a fishery manager, to be perfectly honest, and you have one sitting here.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenberger, have you heard concerns from fishery enforcement officers about the level of illegal sale and the level of unauthorized fishing in the lower Fraser?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Mr. Lunn, if I could perhaps have tab 72 from our documents, please. I'm going to go to page, you'll see on the left-hand side of the page at the top, 119, please. And if I could have this tab entered as an exhibit, Mr. Commissioner.
I'm sorry, before we mark this as an exhibit, I'd like to know what it is and whose evidence this is and whether it's relevant to what we're doing and all of those things.
Mr. Commissioner, if I'm continually interrupted with these kind of questions, my 20 minutes will be gone. I know in hockey where somebody makes an objection and one side loses, there's a penalty to the person making the objection. I think it goes with measuring sticks. Maybe that would be appropriate here. The tab is...
I beg your pardon?
Hockey sticks.
What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting where a lot of my time is taken up in
I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner. I'm going to suggest Council's remarks be addressed to the Commissioner and not to each other.
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner, but there is a certain a level of respect that I'm expecting in this room, and I am doing my work.
I would not mean to or intend to cause an affront to my friend at any time. What I'm merely saying, Mr. Commissioner, if I'm continually interrupted on basic issues and long explanations about every exhibit, I'll never get through this cross.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm very sorry to take up my friend's time here, but when objections, I think it's fair to say we all knew in this room that there was an application made, and it was in respect to the representation of your particular client. And one of the concerns was the fluid running of this particular hearing. Objections are made. They're not made frivolously. They have to be made. They're made properly. Ms. Gartner made her objections properly. And I think it would be appropriate in asking your questions if you're careful in how you ask them, so that then the witness can answer them and we can run efficiently. But there should be, of course, no penalty, and I do find that quite offensive.
I'm not offended to it. If I was standing up and taking somebody's time on who they thought was unreasonable, I would raise an objection to the loss of time. The document in question at tab number 72 is a series of documents that were entered into the case with Vanderpeet, where it went to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada accepted them as valid exhibits, and these are merely copies from the exhibits filed in the Supreme Court of Canada. So I don't think there should be an issue with them, Mr. Commissioner. And that's clearly indicated on the first page of the tab.
I wonder if Mr. Eidsvik, and I haven't had a chance to look at all of these documents right now, but I wonder if he has a question for the witness, if he ought to just put it and we can carry on until somebody finds a question objectionable. I know Mr. Eidsvik is over his time allotment by a couple of minutes, but he has had a number of interruptions, so please carry on for a few more.
The documents in question, one of the issues they raise is the level of food fish taken in the fishery in the lower Fraser River versus in the upper Fraser River. And your allocation this year, I think, for the Stolo was about 300,000 sockeye, is that correct? For 2010, Mr. Gray? For food?
Sorry, for this year, these, Mr. Commissioner, this is a matter under discussion. I don't know what this year's allocation is.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cray, I meant to refer to 2010.
There was an agreement for 2010. I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, I don't have the year's agreement, last year's agreement in front of me to review the allocations as they're set out in the agreement.
I can see I'm going to be under time pressure here, so maybe I can get a little bit, shorten this up a little bit. In terms of food fish, what is a legitimate allocation for food fish per person? Mr. Cray?
Mr. Commissioner, what folks may not understand is allocations of fish in the Aboriginal fishery are not on a person-by-person basis. They're allocations that are broad and are intended for communities fishing in a particular geographic area, in this case of the Lower Fraser River. So the fish are not partitioned or apportioned out as to the individual Aboriginal person.
So you can't add up if you're, say, a member of the Kwantlen Band, you couldn't say to the Kwantlen, well, here's your allocation for the Kwantlen, and then they would divide up among their community, because it is a communal allocation, isn't it?
The Kwantlen First Nation, Mr. Commissioner, fishes collectively with a large number of bands situated between the Portman Bridge and Sawmill Creek in the Fraser Canyon. That area of the river, when there is an allocation, for example, for food, will fish that allocation. They'll put fishermen out on the river to catch fish for their food, social, and ceremonial need, along with the other bands as well. And the fishery is managed by a communal license that stipulates where fishing may take place, by what means, and the duration of the fishery and the disposition of the fish.
Perhaps I could have tab 77 of our documents, Mr. Lund. And page 2 of that. And partway down the page, and Mr. Cray, perhaps you can help me again, we see the Kwantlen Band, and it's the population, 173 total and 100 on reserve and 73 off the reserve, is that correct?
Mr. Commissioner, I have to apologize. I don't know the source of this demographic information. If it comes from Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, and it might, and it's for 2002. That may be the case. It may be a bit different because there's 9. That was in 2002. It's now 2009. So the band population may be larger.
Okay, thank you. If I could have that marked as an exhibit, Mr. Commissioner.
What is the source of this document?
It's Indian Affairs, and it's titled at the top there, Banned Registered Indian Population by Sex and Residence.
I see the title. I see the bottom, it says IMB. I'm not familiar with, is this an Indian Affairs document?
Yes.
And we're to trust you on that. Could we have at least the cover sheet provided at another time?
Of course. Now, if we go to tab 88, please.
That would be exhibit number 1,275.
And if we go to tab 88, please. This is the DFO's 2002 harvests of Aboriginal fish in the Lower Fraser River.
I'm sorry, did you say tab 88?
Tab 88, that's correct, Mr. Lynn. Thank you. If we go to page 4, and if you can flip that if it's possible. Thank you, Mr. Lynn. And if we go to the column, it's about midway through, you'll see the Kwantlen. This is the sockeye catch, the Kwantlen sockeye catch. And you can see, Mr. Lund, if you add up the 38,683 and the 566, that gives us the Kwantlen food fishery catch for 2002 on sockeye. Is that correct? If this table and DFO's got it right? Do I have that correct, Mr. Gray?
I don't know. I'm looking for your reference here. So
The reference is on
lead
the-
me to it.
The reference is on the first page where it comes from. This column, if you see Port Mann to Mission,
Right.
and then underneath that you'll see a column, two columns titled Kwantlen.
Right.
One
right.
is the set net fishery, one is the drift net fishery.
Right.
And at the bottom we have 38,683 for drift, 566 sockeye for set net.
Those would be the recorded catches.
Those would be the recorded
Yes.
catches. Now, if we go back to the 173 people and divide that into the 39,000 sockeye, we get about 220 sockeye a person. How's your math?
It's pretty good.
Okay. Have I got that about right?
You do.
Okay. So a sockeye is about 5 pounds, 5.5 pounds?
In the round.
In the round, yeah. So here we have over 1,000 pounds of sockeye in the round, plus Chinook, plus coal, plus pink, plus steelhead, plus chum in that food fishery in that year. So we're over 1,000 pounds per every man, woman, and child. Is that a reasonable food fish number?
Well, Mr. Commissioner, with respect, it may be in the eyes of some, but I noticed at the top of the page, and Mr. Commissioner, I draw your attention to that. It says First Nation sockeye catches, including ceremonial. There isn't any reference to social, but these fish are taken, and each family in the community would have some of these fish for food. But what's not well understood outside of the Stalo community, Mr. Commissioner, or at least I don't think it is that the communities have a very rich ceremonial life. For example, they have naming ceremonies, and this would be true of all the First Nations on the Lower Fraser River. I'll just give a few examples. Naming ceremonies, celebrating the birth of a child, marriages, what is commonly referred to as potlatches. There are funerals in our communities, and I could provide a long, long list. Some of these events, these social, cultural events in the community, might include 20 people. In other instances, if, for example, a prominent leader in the community passes on, there may be 1,000 people present at such an event in our community. The host community is obliged to provide fish on such occasions. So what the communities do is they catch a lot of fish for food, for immediate needs that they may have in each of the families in the community, but they put a lot of fish up for the winter months, for events that can be foreseen and others that can't. So they put them in storage. They store them in their household in some instances. And as we know now, many of these communities will put some of these fish up in cold storage plants. But the fish are, yes, they're used for food, but they're used more broadly in the community than just simply adding up what the catch is and then dividing that catch by the number of residents in the community. On the face of it, it looks like a lot of fish, but what folks don't understand, people looking from outside of our community into the community don't understand or don't fully appreciate, is the community shares that fish very broadly.
So would the sharing of fish in the lower Fraser be any different in the upper Fraser? In terms of communities?
I would expect there are some similarities in the cultural life of the community, but I'm not the person to ask about life in the upper reaches of the watershed.
Mr. Commissioner, I have one or two last questions and then I'm done. Mr. Kay, would it surprise you that, I mean, how many Aboriginal Canadians are on and have access on the Fraser River? Thanks. Can you tell me the population of people that have access to Fraser River sockeye on the Fraser? Do you know that?
Well, with respect to Mr. Commissioner, that's a difficult one to respond to, but generally speaking, what we see in the watershed is about 97 First. We don't see, but there are approximately 97 First Nations, and approximately half, if not more, of the province's First Nations folk live in those communities throughout the watershed. Some are at home on reserve, and some are away in city, either upgrading their education or they're away for health care, or they've found employment that has taken them away from the community. But as a rule, in the summer, they do come home and they do fish along with the rest of us, and we share our catch with them.
Perhaps I can have a couple more minutes. Mr. Lowe's graciously given me some of his time. And tab 73 in my set of documents on page 349, please, Mr. Lunn.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm not sure whether Mr. Eidsvik intended to mark that last exhibit.
Yeah,
I don't
yes,
believe
yes,
it was
I did.
the
I'm sorry.
exhibit
Thank
number. And I'll just say, in order to get through the afternoon, we do need to finish up even with Mr. Lowe's time, certainly before the lunch hour.
Thank you. If I could go to page 349 on that tab 70, our documents.
I think you wanted tab 88 marked, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm glad that,
That would be exhibit 1276.
and tab 72 as well, and I will bring a cover sheet for it, so perhaps we can mark it for identification today, and when I supply the cover sheet, we can mark it as an exhibit.
I'm sorry, I don't believe tab 72
Sorry.
was the one you meant to refer to, Mr. Eidsvik.
Which one was that, Patrick? Mr. McGowan?
I think it's tab 73 that you...
73. Yes, that's where I am right now. Perhaps we can move on to tab 73. I'm at page 349, Mr. Lunn. And it's in the top left hand of the document. So this is a DFO memo. If we go to page 1 on that, it's a DFO memo dated April 14th, 1987. And I'm actually at page 10 of that memo, if it helps. So if we go to page 349, Mr. Lunn. And this is raising the point that I was raising with you, Mr. Craig. And I'll just briefly read in the second part of the second paragraph, referring to in-river allocations. A second problem related to the catch by the IFF, that would be the old Indian food fishery, I think, isn't that correct? What was termed then the Indian food fishery, what is today the FSC fishery?
That's correct.
Is its distribution throughout the watershed. For example, the Stolos with 2,800 people caught 320,000 sockeye for a per capita catch of 600 pounds of fish. Comparing this to the catch by the 3,500 carried Seekonai Prince George of 27,000 for a per capita catch of 50 pounds illustrates the gross disproportionate disproportionate catch between upriver and downriver fisheries. Do you think there is a gross disproportion between upriver and downriver FSC fisheries, Mr. Gray?
Well, Mr. Commissioner, with respect, there are so many things that come into play here that it's almost too difficult for me to decide where I'll start in response to this. On the face of it, it would look that way, but it depends on the history of the fishery and the extent of the use of the fishery in different reaches of the watershed. On the Lower Fraser, most of the passing sockeye stocks are there and available for harvest, and there's a community very much interested in harvesting these fish. And over time, they've become accustomed to catching a number of fish. And even in that era, they sorted out these arrangements with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. In fact, I worked in the Lower Fraser office of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in that era. So whilst this may reflect accurately the catch on the Lower Fraser at that time, and there may have been smaller catches in the upper reaches of the watershed, I acknowledge that, but to put a value judgment on it, I wouldn't go that far.
Tab I was looking to enter was the population data. That was at tab 77. I could have that entered or identified, and I'll bring the cover sheet and have it entered as an exhibit at a later date.
Mr. Commissioner, as it relates to this particular tab, let's start here. He's referred to one paragraph in a bunch of collections of various different exhibits that were before the Supreme Court of Canada. If he wants that one paragraph with the memo which is the memo of April 14th, 1987, that may be the appropriate exhibit that can go in. He's put it to the witness, and the witness has responded. But there's a lot of other collections. He's picked and choose between the exhibits. I think that if this is the exhibit he intends to rely on, then let's keep it to that.
One of the problems we have in the commission, Mr. Commissioner, is getting our documents in, and the documents were all accepted by the Supreme Court of Canada as real, legitimate documents. I would have referred to a number of others in each tab if I had time, but I don't.
Well, at this point, Mr. Eisvik, let's mark this document, which has a face page, and you went to that a moment ago, so perhaps we can just go back to the face page, Mr. Lund, of that particular document. And if you could describe that on the record, Mr. Eisvik, so we ensure
that is a memo dated April 14th, 1987, from F.J. Fraser to G.E. Jones.
All right, so
concerning the 1987 Fraser River IFF.
And it's page 349 of that document that you have made reference to, is that correct?
Mr. Commissioner, at least I think it would be appropriate to put the whole document in.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I understood which page you
Yes,
had
it was
referred to.
349.
Yes, well, then that's the document that should be marked as an exhibit, Mr. Registrar.
And I'm not sure where we left our document at tab 77, the registered Indian population.
Mr. Commissioner, my understanding is that document...
Mr. McGowan, your microphone is not on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner. My understanding is that document has already been marked as document 1275, exhibit 1275.
Thank you. And I'll bring a cover page to relieve Ms. Gardner's concerns. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, panel members.
Mr. Lowes, did you have any questions? Mr. Gale is next. Mr. Commissioner, we have 5 more minutes.
Sorry, Mr. Lowes does not have any questions?
Sorry, Mr. Lowes has just indicated to me he does not have any questions.
No, if I've got 5 minutes.
I must have misunderstood the vigorous shaking of the head.
Oh, I thought we had to be finished at 12:30, and I'm prepared to finish at 12:30, Mr. Commissioner. This is a question for each of the panelists, perhaps in turn, but my impression of the materials that were called the roadmap and those sorts of things were that they were discussions to try to come to some sort of definition of what the terms joint management or co-management mean, some kind of agreed definition. Is that correct? Perhaps Mr. Rosenberger, you can answer that question.
Roadmap process is one place where the department is working on how co-management might be defined in the Fraser, and the department's also working on broader co-management issues through other sources in this region.
Well, the distinction that I'm making is between a process that's aimed at arriving at an agreed-to definition and a process that is aimed at achieving an objective that's already defined. And I'm assuming that the roadmap process is the former rather than the latter.
That's correct.
And I'm assuming that each of the members of the panel has his own definition of what he means when he uses the term co-management. So perhaps starting at the left and my left and working to the right, you could give the Commissioner your definition of co-management. Mr. Wilson?
Well, first I'd like to make a point in saying that I'm on a working group with the First Nations Fish Council for co-management, so that discussion is happening at that table.
Yeah, when you use the word, what do you mean?
What do we mean? We want to be equal members at the table at all levels, or all scales, whatever we want to call it.
Equal to whom?
To Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
To the Government of Canada.
Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
Yeah. And Mr. Cray?
Well, I don't have a working definition of co-management, in case that's what you're looking for.
Yes.
But I envision a process where, in the case of the Lower Fraser River, the Stalo and the Musqueam and all the other First Nations there are partners with the Department of Fisheries in the management of their respective fisheries. They have certain duties and responsibilities, and they govern their activities by certain principles, and work with a common vision, specific goals in mind.
All right. And the other part, the partnership, does that include members of the public as distinct from the Government of Canada? What's called third parties?
I think, Mr. Commissioner, with respect, what we've heard these past 2 days, and we may hear more today, is that the First Nations right now are striving hard to build a Tier 1 level process between and amongst themselves, and a strong Tier 2 process working with DFO as our partners. And we're hard at work at that. And I think, Mr. Commissioner, you might have recalled my comments yesterday that the Stalo are already well down the road to building good working relationships with conservation groups on the Lower Fraser River, sport fishing interests and commercial fishing interests. In fact, it's just not a relationship where we just meet and talk. We've actually formed a society in common together. It's called the Salmon Table Society. And in that society, we work on specific projects. In other words, we're willing and able, and we've demonstrated that we're prepared to be inclusive of and work with other interests in the fishery.
And I commend you for that. Mr. Sorry, I've forgotten your... Shepherd, your definition of co-management?
I basically will defer that question, since there's a tremendous amount of work being done at the BC-wide level right now to define that, so I would leave that to the experts to define.
No. When you use the word, what do you mean?
Well, what it means to me personally is that there's a devolution within the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. As in most INAC programs, there's been a devolution in healthcare, in education, and so on. So there's got to be a devolution process. So I see that the devolution of decision making, giving it to the regions, more of the decision making on a scale level. And an increased role for First Nations to set the course for their own destinies, as opposed to having it set for them.
And finally, Mr. Rosenberger, when you use the term co-management, what do you mean?
Co-management is an objective that I strive for, of working to have shared responsibilities with First Nations and other parties that have interests in in this case around the Fraser Salmon Resource, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities with each of the parties.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Till 2 o'clock, Mr. Commissioner.
The hearing is adjourned until 2 p.m.